power of Jesus to be healed. Yesterday, when we were out working, tearing up all that stuff in the parking lot, Sylvia saw us over here doing it. She looked inside from the air conditioning and said, "Oh, keep working, keep working." But yesterday, we had been talking with some of the men. We're talking about how so many houses were without electricity. And someone turned to one of the other guys and said, "Do you have power at your house?" And he said, "No, I'm married." That was the first time I've ever heard. Look at Nancy Warren's face. Just shaking her head back and forth. But the power of Jesus is what we hear about today. The power of Him to heal us, to heal those who were very, very sick and outcast at that time. I don't know how many of you know what first century Judaism was like, but the closest thing we can compare it to today is some of the devout Muslims in the East, in the Middle East. There was a strict purity code, with Temple Judaism being the center of everything. And so the priests who were attending at the temple were the most holy. They were the most pure. There were all types of impurity throughout the culture. And it was not just a religious, it was a socio-economic culture. And it was all based on purity. Men were the most pure, being priests and things like that. And women were impure a lot of the time, not most of the time. A lot of things had to do with bodily discharge. If you had a discharge of any type, you were unclean. Nobody could touch you. You had to be away from everybody. And so, even walking on a graveyard, if you walked on a grave, you were impure. And if you were maimed, you were impure. If you had a disease, you were impure. All these things kept people in a social stratification with, like I said, the priests being the most pure, and at the lowest were those like leprosy or Gentiles. And so that's how all of Judaism was ordered in Israel. And so we've got this man, Jesus, who is a teacher, a well-respected man at this time. And Jairus comes and says, "My daughter's dying. Come lay hands on her." Now, any man in his right mind would never have touched a young girl at 12 years old. And so, just for Jesus to come and touch her, that would make him impure, especially since she's sick. And then we've got this woman who's been hemorrhaging for 12 years. Any blood was impure. You could not touch blood or anybody that had any kind of blood that was running. It was impure. And so for this woman to walk through a crowd, it was just amazing. There was no way. She, for 12 years, being a religious Jewish woman, she would have been kept outside of the temple, outside of community, outside of everything. She would have been alone, completely alone, because no one would want to touch her. You could not eat. You could not be around other people. All of these things. And so here this woman comes. And imagine, she's brushing up against these religious people as she's walking toward Jesus. Can you imagine the fear that these people must have had in the crowd? And then she reaches over and touches Jesus' cloak. And she's immediately made well. It's not just that he stops her bleeding. It's that he restores her to wholeness. She probably hadn't been touched in 12 years. Can you imagine not being touched in 12 years? And as soon as she lays hold of him, she feels the power of Christ coming through her and healing her. She's restored to wholeness. She is truly healed. Yes, she will die eventually, but right now, she has been made whole just by the touch of the hem of his clothes. And then, of course, we come to this girl that's dying, and Jesus just says, touches her, grabs her, and says, "Stand up." And she's made well. So Jesus has been to one of the leaders of the church's house, and to one of the outcasts, one of the most outcast persons in society. And he's made them both well. You know, we have no idea what this woman with the hemorrhages for 12 years must have suffered to live in isolation. You know, when I first grew up in the church, it was very similar to that woman with 12 years of hemorrhaging. You know, we didn't do any hugging. My God. You know, if the priest said, "The peace of the Lord be with you," you just kind of say, you don't want to even open your mouth. Do you remember those days? And my God, what if you talked to somebody and said, back then you'd say, "How are you?" Even if they'd had 3 deaths in the family that week, they'd say, "I'm fine, thank you." And you wouldn't know anybody's business. You wouldn't touch anybody. It was you came in, got your dose of religion, and got out. Hardly anybody touched anybody those days. And then they changed it on us. My God, we've got this peace now, which is, what do we got here? I know I say a Chinese fire drill is politically incorrect, but that's what it is. It's holy chaos. And so, I've heard people say to me, "This is the only place I get my hug. This is the only place where I am touched and people care about me." That's what the healing power of God does. It brings us back to wholeness. It brings us to community. And then, my God, once we ask somebody how they're doing and they start to tell us, then what happens? Then you have to start listening. Then you have to start caring. Then you have to be concerned about somebody. You know, it was so much easier to be the church when the priest said the peace of the Lord and you just went. But now, my God, you've got to actually interact with one another. But isn't that what it's all about? Isn't that what it's all about? The healing power of Christ? You know, the healing power of Christ is available not just to those people who for 12 years have been ostracized by their community, but it's available to us right here and right now. How impure are you? You know, in the New Testament, the word sinners usually means about the level of impurity that you have in the social stratification. Not the sin itself, but what you have done to exclude yourself, or how you live, exclude yourself. And it was usually the rich who were able to keep the purity laws, and of course the poor were unable to. So the rich and the poor had nothing to do with one another. But sinners, when we talk about sinners in the New Testament, it's more about purity, not acts, but purity. And the healing power of Christ is still available to us today. What is it that you need to reach out to and touch Christ to be healed? It's possible. It's possible. You know, I've seen alcoholics who have struggled and struggled and struggled, and they've reached for Christ, and Christ has touched them, and they've been healed. Not instantaneously, but they begin to recover. I've seen other folks who have been left out of the community, who have reached out to the church and have been welcomed, and they never knew that people like you existed. But there's a more important type of impurity that I'm talking about today. What is it that separates you from God? Are you not good enough? Do you not have the things that you need to survive? Are you outcast? Do you feel inferior? Are you upset? Are you hurt? Or are you broken? All you have to do is reach out to Christ this morning. When you come right here and touch His body and taste His blood, desire to be healed. Let whatever separates you from God be taken away. Let the power of Christ flow into you through the sacrament of His body and blood. That's why we come here every week. to receive that grace upon grace which restores us to wholeness. It's not just a memorial. It's a saving grace with the power to transform and heal us. So the next time you hear words about sinning, think impurity. Do some study about the impurity laws. Think about all those things. Be compassionate as Christ is compassionate. Reach out to one another. But first, reach out to Him. And you will be